guys, welcome back to another episode of Chats in the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting with Steve. He's an author and he has an amazing story about growing up in a dysfunctional family. But Steve, before we get into that, let's talk about who you are. Give us a little bit more about yourself before you get into what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm an author for many years. Since I'm a boy, I've been writing. And because of my background, which we'll get into in a little bit, I've kind of made most of my life doing things like this, whether it's speaking to schools or different media outlets, and just try to share my experience with people and just give them hope and make them realize that they're not alone, because that tends to be the tendency. People think they're alone, that they can get through things and they can even not just survive, but they can actually accomplish things to be successful. So that's who I am. And it's funny because this I do, as you might say, volunteer, but it pretty much occupies most of my time a lot of weeks, and I enjoy it very much.
So what made you decide to want to be a writer? You said since you were a boy, you were writing.
That was just instinct with me. It's interesting. Now, for me, my original, and I say, but I'm talking very young, it was an escape for me originally, because of all the abuse in my home. And that's why I would always put myself in the stories. Like I was always writing short stories or even poems. I was writing proses. I didn't know they were called proses back then, but I was writing them. And that's why even in my books, and I left it that way because people said they thought it was cool, you'll always see at least a character named Steve in all my books. Because my books now, the fiction part of my books were ideas I actually had when I was a kid, when I was a child. Now, I revamped them, of course, and matured them over the years, but they're still rich. A lot of the ideas are what I had when I was in first, second, third grade then, and it was an escape for me. That's why also you'll notice, even in the fiction parts of my books, there might be fantastic stories, whether they're science fiction, they're action adventure, but the characters who tend to have realistic problems that young people have today, whether there's alcoholism in the house or abuse or they're running away. One of my characters was in foster care. I was in foster care. So I kind of put my own personal issues into them, but it works out now years later. It makes for great characters. They're very relatable.
So how much do you have to, I know when you're writing and you're saying you're putting a character in your book named Steve and they have all these real life problems, how often do you just have to say, okay, I have to step away from this for a bit because I'm too much into it right now?
For me, not much. I guess because I've always been speaking about the issues over the years. For me, that's not such a big, and not just my character, by the way, the other characters in the book, I'll have them with problems too, as well. I'll spread them around a little bit, It's kind of funny. I guess if my book was talking to other books, the characters would meet, they'd probably say, oh, you're one of Steve Simpson's characters, aren't you? Because you got all these problems going on, But I just think it originally just started as an escape for me. Years later, as an adult, became a great technique because, if you care about characters in the book, then the story's a lot better because now you're really glued to, you kind of with them when things happen and you really care. So it kind of worked out to be a cool technique. And of course, as we'll discuss it later, there's also the nonfiction book I have in the books, which go into survival and things such as suicide and self-esteem. So they kind of blend together. But writing's always just been a fun thing for me. Even when I was not the best student, I turned that around. But that's the one thing I always gave myself credit for. I just was able to write. I just enjoyed it.
I love how you said also it was a way for you to escape. Let's talk about some of the things that you've escaped from your childhood.
Sure. Well, let's start back off, like I said, first, second grade. So let's talk about that in childhood. You know what it is to be an A student?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I was a Z student. I was the opposite of an A student. I was a teacher's nightmare. Okay, when the teacher would get me, they'd look at the thing. Oh no, I got him. What I do wrong? Always making jokes, always interrupting the class, and never did well in school. My lowest grade is a -20.
Oh wow!
And you might say, how can you get a -20? So what happened was when I was young, I always thought that the quote smart kids had the best family lives. Now I was wrong, and I'm going to go into that and tell my story. But I thought then if you were smart, you had the best parents, everything was happy in your life, and I was jealous, insanely jealous. So what I would do is during a test, I always try to distract these kids so they do less on their test. And the teacher caught me, and she said, "You get back in your seat, and whatever you get, I'm taking off 20 points." Now I thought I was going to show her. I said, "I'm not going to even try. 0. I thought, and then she got one on me. She says, no, -20. So she stuck to her 20. And thing with me though is I didn't even try. Like I would try to figure out how to cheat sometimes. How can I do this? My friends would say, why don't you just study? It would take half the time. And I go, what's the use? I had back then what's called low self-esteem. And the reason why is my father was an alcoholic, an abusive alcoholic, and I was both physically and verbally abused. The physical, I always say he had what I call a snap temper. He can have a conversation like we're having. Nothing's wrong. And out of nowhere, hit you, push you, throw things at you. You never knew where it was coming from. And much as the physical, of course, was dangerous, for me, the verbal abuse took more of a toll on me. That's what shattered my self-esteem. That's why I never tried in school, because by the time I even hit first grade, I was constantly told all these things about myself. So then why even try? And the interesting thing is, though, in school, though, the persona was always me making jokes. Always, you know. I never forget one day, well, at least probably more than once, but one sticks in my own. One of the teachers in the second grade said, you just need discipline at home. You know, they're too easy to do. And I'm thinking to myself, she is out of her mind. Okay, I get beat all the time. But of course, obviously the teacher didn't know that. Because my persona, again, was always making jokes, always interrupting the class, you know, always getting thrown out. Sometimes the teachers would even laugh. They couldn't help themselves, you know. And that was my thing, to throw me out. But you laughed, you know. So, and then, and this went on and on. And but one thing, again, back to the writing, what we'll talk about, this is the epitome of low self-esteem. I would cut school like in third grade. I got away with it easy because no one dreamed I was actually just playing hooky, not showing up. But where I would go, this is almost like a writer's story, was to the library. Okay. And there was 2 libraries in that town. I went to the smaller one. And my famous line, first I would read books. And looking back now, was way beyond my age level as far as reading skill. But my line to the librarian, or whoever was at the front desk, was, can I have a pen and paper? That was my line. And they would give me paper, or sometimes just give me the pad, depends on what was left in it, and a pen. And I would just sit there and write, and just stories, and again, poems and things. And here's a picture. If you had a picture of this young boy cutting school, but he's out there causing trouble, I'm in the library writing stories and then reading other people's stories. And that's the epitome of a low self-esteem, okay? Because I could have easily done well in school. Now, for me, unfortunately, by the time I was 11, because of all the hopelessness, I did become suicidal at that point. And I always stress, because no one goes into a lot of details when they mention this. I'll go into details. I always say, I didn't want to die, I just don't want to live. And you might say, it's the same exact thing. It's not. I had no idea what it was like being dead, but I knew it was like being alive. And it was just constant hopelessness and always drama. And this is the key. I never thought it was going to get better. And if I did, why would I want to kill myself? I would just hang out. But I honestly thought it's just always going to be this. And from that point on. And then when I was about 12, I was what you call a couch surfer. Run away, but you go to friends' houses and stay there for a few days, keep going back and forth. But by the way, as a side note, that can be dangerous too, because even though you're not leaving the state or something, word gets out that a kid is out of their house very fast, and predators will zoom in on that. Okay, so even couch surfers can be very dangerous if you speak to people like the National Runaway Switchboard, and they'll tell you that. So back to me, a positive thing happened to me was one of the parents called Protective Services, and they got right involved, and I was put in foster care. I was in 2 foster homes, one for a month, one for a year. And I'll take a pause for a moment. I'm going to compliment both those homes. They were wonderful people. I know we had a lot of negative things about foster care, unfortunately, and I'm sure things have happened, but I had wonderful experiences. They were just nice, healthy parents. They just wanted to help out. They had homes and help out a child. And I learned things in the foster home. For example, when they got in fights, they didn't go to DEFCON 4, okay? They didn't start threatening each other. They didn't abuse it. It was an argument, and it was over. And the first couple of times they'd be in an argument, I was bracing. I was like, oh, he's going to hit her. No, it never happened. So that was a glimpse at how healthy families handle disputes and handle frustration. Now, as a mandatory thing, you had to get involved with therapy, and for me, self-help group. And I joined a self-help group. And one of the biggest revelations was, and I remember earlier I told you what my impression of the smart kids were. Okay. I walk in this meeting. The first meeting I went to was all girls. Eventually, I went to the meeting with boys and girls. But right after that, I realized, wait, there's some smart ones here. I know that, And I actually said, like, to one, what are you doing here? And of course, I learned that some of those kids tried suicide more times than I thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, and here, this became a revolution for me. This was how my self-esteem got turned around. They were being called the same things that my father called me. Now, wait. How are you being called stupid, moron, failure? I'm leaving out the other 4-letter words, but even you're an A student. You're fantastic. You're a teacher's dream. You're a parent's dream. And that was the point. It was nothing to do with me. And anyone who's watching this, whether it's a young person or even an adult in an abusive relationship, it's not what we do or don't do or what we fail out. It's not that you are, maybe if you had a daughter instead of a son, but not wouldn't have made any difference. An abuser abuses someone because they're an abuser. Mm-hmm. It's not the victim's fault. So if I had great grades, he still would have done that. If I was a different personality, he still would have abused me. That was a big revelation for me. Now, simultaneously, I used to bring things I wrote, because I told them, let me see some. And I bring them to the meeting. And one of the girls said, Steve, I can't write like this. You're a phenomenal writer. Like, you should be blowing school away. You're smarter than this. I'm not smarter than you. Yes, you are. And they actually taught me how to study because I didn't bother. And it was kind of easy. You kind of just read the chapters you're supposed to. And then your test probably will have, questions based on those chapters. And here's a big one: pay attention in class.
Yeah.
That was kind of an easy one for me. Now, to be fair, also though, I'm going to say when you are living with abuse and you've had a horrible night and you're in school the next day, it becomes hard to pay attention because you're thinking about the night before. It's a Friday. You got the whole weekend ahead of you. Oh no, you're worried about that. So, to be fair, that was part of my thing. Now I'm out of that environment, and that's not happening every night. So make a long story short, started passing, then always passed. And I switched schools in between. I'll say this move, that's when I switched to foster home. And eventually ended up on the honor roll. By next year, National Junior Honor Society. Became one of those smart kids. Joined sports just for fun. I always say that if you're in a sport or a club or something and you're involved with the school, this way, the last period ends, you're not making that mad dash out the building. Like, you start liking things about the school. And then this was the best. They eventually made me student of the month. Now, I was in 8th grade then. This is not just for my class, for the whole 8th grade. And they hung my picture up in the hall as like a model student. I have to tell you, I used to walk back that picture and shake my head and laugh. Because only 2 years prior, that same picture would have been a dartboard in the teacher's faculty room.
Dartboard.
So all of a sudden, what happened? And here's the key. I was always able to do that. When I was picking on the smart kids, I was one of them. I just didn't know that. And that's the epitome of low self-esteem. The only thing I regret, though, is never finish school. And anyone who's watching this that might still be in school, just finish it. Worry about things later. However, with that self-esteem, I became a successful mortgage banker and founded my own publishing company, which I have obviously 4 books now in print, and doing what I'm doing now, which I love doing, and speaking to schools and so on. So the self-esteem still carried me a long way as far as that. I just, if you don't mind, I want to talk about, I mentioned suicide.
Uh-huh.
And for those that are watching this, that might be on their mind, or they know someone that might want to show them this interview. I will say this. I know what it is to think things are hopeless. I know it is to say I don't see a way out of this. But anyone I've known because of my work over the years, I've been in touch with a lot of people who also had contemplated suicide or even tried it like myself. And all of them over the years have one thing. There might be different personalities and come from different walks of life, But those that thought about it but didn't do it, or tried it but thank God lived, we all have one thing in common. We are 100%, not 99%, 100%. We're all glad that we didn't die. Why? Because things always got better. Somehow, some way, they got better. So if I can share that with someone, and I didn't just study this in the course, I lived this. And I've been in touch with so many people in the same boat as me. And now sometimes if you're still in school, go to the school social worker, go to the school counselor, psychologist. I used to be told to do that by friends, but I had this one line. I know what they're going to say. I know what they're going to say. That's why I used to answer. I was wrong. I didn't know everything they were going to say. And they really had helpful insight. And of course, as I said, for me, self-help groups, schools have them, community centers. A lot of churches have them. Doesn't have to be a church we belong to. But a lot of churches have parish outreaches, and different charitable organizations or Catholic charities. There's all these different that have self-help groups that you can just join, or you ask where the pastor is, or maybe a different church has it. So I highly recommend doing that. And again, therapy. There's also organizations, but I'm telling you, things get better, and they get better so much faster than we thought they would. That's the thing that always amazed me, how fast things got better. So again, someone said this a long time ago, and it sounds like a line, but it's not. He says, just when seems things to be the absolute worst, that's about when things turn around and get better. Except, he said, unfortunately, that's when we tend to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to look at my life, and I have other people's lives I've been blessed to be in touch with. And yeah, that's just about when things turned around, And I also tell people that you do want to hang in there, because not just things getting better, you can eventually share your experience with other people and give them strength and hope to get through things. And that could be a big motivation for people as well.
I love that. Now we have to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. And we just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
And we are back chatting with Steve. Steve, there's one thing that you mentioned earlier. You talked about the self-help group going. As a child with low self-esteem, was it hard for you to open up in those groups to actually talk?
You'd think it would have been, because my persona then was make jokes, I have no problems, And if someone even attempted to say, Steve, are you okay? I deflect it. Yeah, I'm fine, but what about you? Oh, I saw your sister the other day. I always make a joke and get it off of me, But I have to say that from the first group to the second, I joined different ones. And even the one that was all girls were for a 13-year-old boy. But no, I was just so welcoming to me that they made it so easy to share. And I think the thing for me is I instantly heard them just sharing the same life as I lived, So for me, I did open up fairly soon. Maybe not the first or second meeting, obviously. I kind of sat there and listened around. And I think back, because we were all teenagers then, and I think back how smart someone was. Like, they knew enough, like when I walked in, one got up from the middle and let me sit in the middle, and she took the end seat. I didn't think any of it. I realize now, because she didn't want me to isolate. Like, it was like I was sit in midst of all of them. So it's interesting how teenagers, they need more credit than they're given, that she knew enough to do that for me, I remember one, there was a prayer they said at the meeting. I didn't know it. And the next meeting I come to, and she hand wrote it for me. But now you can kind of read it. And that, I went home and cried over that. Why? Because someone thought about me during the week and took the time and did something. I was used to being told by my father, you're annoying, get away from it. That was what I lived with, So I just, so those are things that made it easy to open up.
So when things were coming out about your childhood and the situation at home, were people shocked to learn about that? Were they like not surprised at all?
Well, in my original schools and stuff, well, some were not surprised if they were savvy, but some were thrown off because the line they'd say is, "He was always such a happy kid, making jokes all the time." Like they just that was. I mean, let's face it, we've seen celebrities, Robin Williams, remember, always making jokes and a comedian, but inside dying, and that was me. People were laughing off. I mean, everyone wanted to sit next to me at lunch. Okay, why? Because I was hysterical, making fun. But inside, oh my God, I thought horrible myself, hated my life. So I think those people might have been in shock. Now the other side of it is the schools I did very well in. Then years later, all of a sudden they see me on TV in an interview and go, "Huh? That was his background?" Because those teachers never would have dreamed I was a student. If you'd said to them, what I was like years before, oh, that must have been a different Steve you're talking about. There's no way, So I think it just proves to you how many children are out there right now, and adults too, that could be doing so much, but they just don't believe they can. They've been almost programmed, unfortunately, since birth, horrible things about themselves, and they just play that role.
So how did you overcome it? Because obviously that's a great, huge overcoming. And you're talking about wanting to commit suicide when you were 11 years old, being verbally and physically abused by your dad. How did you overcome it? How did you get the strength to overcome it?
I would say, again, seeing that other kids around that table had the same problems as me and they're happy and they're succeeding. And to me, it was like, wait a minute. So there's hope here, So that's the thing. You always think the problem with school, and I should just say school, even at work, even adults. Well, now talking about school, everybody's always fronting, as they say. Holidays, okay? How was your holiday? Oh, great time. Oh, it was a blast. Meanwhile, a lot of them had miserable times. Mother or father got drunk. Parents are fighting. They got abused. The table got flipped over. Or who's threatening divorce. They don't say that, of course. So everybody's always, as I call it, fronting. So you think to yourself, I'm the only one? And you really believe that. And that's a kind of dark place to be. When you really think you're alone, no one's ever going to understand. They're going to think it's me, And I think that once, again, we realize that you go to be self-focused and you're not the only one. In fact, there's a statistic that I've heard. I'm not a statistics man, but this one I've heard for so many years, that 1 out of every 5 children at this point is a child of an alcoholic or drug abuser.
Oh, wow.
1 out of every 5. And I have to say, probably dead on accurate. So you got to say to yourself, you go to a classroom, there's a half dozen kids in that class instantly have an alcoholic parent. Now let's not count the ones that don't have an alcoholic parent, but still live with abuse or mental illness in the house or some type of dysfunction. So like a chunk of your class, if these kids don't realize that though, but I started realizing, seeing that, like how many were living that. And again, you can't judge by the grades because, you might have said, okay, this kid's acting out a lot. Maybe there's something going on with him. But some of the members I was in the group with, these kids were A students. No one would have thought there was something going on with them, And I have to tell you, valedictorians have been suicidal, captain of football teams, head cheerleaders. You think they have the best, And I said that once about valedictorian being suicidal, and it was a radio show, and he said to me, "Oh, ours committed suicide my year when I was in high school." So again, like I say, everyone's fronting, and you think people don't have problems, and here you are. I just saw the commercial that you had. There was an article in the paper a few years ago that one of the top students was homeless. The family lost their house. They're living in a shelter. Teachers almost fell over when they found. Now they ran to the aid and helped them out. But again, so I guess dialing back is to realize that when they say you're not alone, you're really not alone.
So let's talk about, you talked about people getting involved. Let's talk about foster care, because you said you're giving shout out to the people in foster care because you were in one for a month and the other one for a year, and how they helped you so much. What was your first initial reaction when they got involved and you were told that you had to go to foster care?
Well, here's the whole thing. So I was staying at a friend's house, okay, because I left. And at that point, mom and dad separated. He ended up with me. It's a long story for that one. By the way, I should preface it by saying after the year I moved back, and my mom, she was totally on her own and actually moved to where I was in school then because I was doing well. God bless her. That was a a very generous thing she did. But at first, I thought I was going to be across the country. I know foster care tends to be like right around where you live. That was the first thing. But the second thing is, you're scary at first because you don't know who these people are, what they're about, And let's face it, you see all these horror movies and stuff. One of them, a vampire or something like, I'm in a strange home. Of course, none of that. And I wrote very early that even when I was in a short-term period, just nice people. Okay, both of them had their own children. The one I was in for a year had another foster child as well, and plus their own children. And but the first week or so you're there. The first night's the weirdest thing. You're sleeping in the bed, it's not yours. So here's the thing: you can be living with abuse, and it's like a strange thing I'm going to say, but those that live through it understand it. But it's still your bed. In some weird way, you're still comfortable, And now you're not in your bed anymore. You're in some completely strange bed. And that to me was upsetting at first. But it went away fast because I think the fact that no abuse, like I said, focusing on school, my life kind of just getting together, kind of took over. And again, the education of how healthy families, respond to each other, So for me, and I think they're caring because most foster parents, they get where you're coming from when you're first there. They know that you're either scared or you don't know what's going on. And it's just, again, that first night or so, just sleeping, waking up like, oh, this wasn't a dream. But now, of course, you look back, it was the healthiest thing that ever happened to me.
Do you think you would, or have you ever thought about being a foster parent to give back to what you've?
It's funny. I thought about that. My schedule, unfortunately, I'm all over the place. So because of that, I won't be maybe up in the future or so on. But I had thought about that, and I ran into anyone I've ever, as an associate or in the mortgage bank industry, once in a while, who's a foster parent, and I'll immediately just hug them and tell them you're a great person, and then I'll tell them my background, and once again they're in shock. Really? Because I know what they do. I one of them I know I used to work with. She actually adopted one of the children eventually because they were never going to go back home. So for me, no, but I would say if someone is even thinking about it, maybe call whoever local agencies are near you and just sit down and check it out because you provide amazing services. There's never enough foster homes. Never
enough good foster homes.
Well, that too. Yes, that too.
You hear horror stories about, and luckily you were one of the lucky ones.
No, I was, and you're right, and they have an unfortunate loss. So once again, for someone who might be watching this that thinks that they would be a nice fit and they know they're a healthy family and and functional, it might be something for them to think about.
Now you mentioned your mom. How was she when you were going through the abuse? What was she doing? Because you said by the time you got back from foster care, she was out on her own and you were able to move back with her.
Yeah, she did the thing which unfortunately some parents don't. Let's face it, in most homes, both parents are abusive, but in most homes, there's the abuser and then there's the codependent, okay, who doesn't want to leave, who buys a lie, it'll never happen again, and even sometimes tells the kids, well, you should have said that. I told you, don't do that with your dad. And that's horrible because the kids actually think they're the cause of the abuse. And so the codependent parent, now my mom broke that off. She says, I can live without you. I'm fine, so in her case, God bless her, she made that move and never looked back. However, that's not always the case. And I've always said codependency, it's how alcoholism is a disease, and composed of overeating is a disease, gambling is a disease. I always say codependency is also like a disease. There should be 12-step program just for that, because it really does. I mean, you'll say, oh, why would she put up with that stuff? And even in school, even in high school, you start seeing those develop with that behavior. The only problem is, though, once they have children, they're taking those children on that codependency ride with them, and that's where, they are guilty at a minimum of child neglect now because you're letting your kids get abused by this person, So I would say she made that break. And for anyone out here thinking about this, you'll make it on your own. you're going to. And maybe family members are watching this and they're saying, yeah, that's my sister, or that's my niece, or whoever, a daughter or son. It could be the other way around too. And maybe it's time, if you just can't get the person with the addiction problem to stop, work on the codependent parent. That's going to be the saving grace to get those kids away from abuse.
I love that. And so what's your relationship like? Did you ever have a relationship with your dad after you came back from foster care?
No, yeah, after years, I didn't see him for many, many years. Then in my 20s, he called. I thought he was calling to make amends or whatever. I don't know what was on his mind, but I sat with him. He was older then, okay, and we talked. And all of a sudden, he just started saying to me, "Whatever happened to you as a kid? You had no because he didn't know about the better grades and all that stuff. Yeah, you never had any ambition." And I looked at him. I said, "That's because I had an abusive alcoholic father." And he kind of was taken back, but he just almost, he couldn't physically abuse me anymore, but the couple of times we had lunch and dinner, he was sneaking in little comments. I think he was actually trying to still see if he could abuse me. So unfortunately, it wasn't, I just cut it out. I don't need to purposely see him for that, And I remember him saying once, calling and say, "What, are we enemies now?" I said, "No, but we're not friends. My friends don't talk to me like that. It's too bad you didn't use this up." I thought it was one of those stories where it's going to be, "I'm so sorry," and makes it. Well, that wasn't the case. And then eventually he did pass away. Now, other cases I've known there with the parents, really, they get sober. They take they're in AA, they take their 8th and 9th step, they make amends, and it's wonderful. That wasn't the case with him. I gave him that shot, but unfortunately, in his case, that I guess he went to his grave in his denial, or not facing up to things that he did.
Wow. So let's talk about your books now. You have several. You said you created your own publishing company and you've written several books. So let's talk about. Give me the title of your books and give us a little synopsis about what each one's about.
Sure. So the 4 novels, there's Runaway, there's Child's Island, there's The World Is Wrong, and there's Who Am I? Now, in each of those books, there's another book, kind of a book within a book. And each of them has a smaller book called The Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook. Now, I'm going to focus on the small part, which is the handbook. That's the nonfiction part. And they're just small articles or snippets about, suicide. Ones on being a child of an alcoholic and the different traits that you may not even realize, like, wait, I thought that was me. I act this way because my parent was an alcoholic. That's in there. Self-esteem, a little bit of the story I kind of told, but condensed in that. I even have surviving the holidays in a dysfunctional home. Bullying, why me? Why am I always, why are certain kids always falling into being bullied? Being patient with yourself. I have one, I call it Crossing the Bridge. You're trying to change, again, patient. And they're all from personal. It's like the suicide one's called, I don't want to die, I just don't want to live, because I used to say that all the time. So they don't read like lectures. They read, someone's going to read, they're going to relate, because they realize the guy that wrote this is he lived through what I'm living through right now. Okay. And I just try to let them know they're not alone. Like I said, encourage them to get help. I keep repeating over and over again, go to the school social worker or go to a local church, go to a self-help. I keep repeating that. I even have a part of the handbook where it gives a variety of different organizations that they can go to. And then the 3 main ones, the suicide, the child abuse hotline. I have the National Runaway Switchboard and the Suicide Prevention as well as hotline. All those, even the back cover of the book. And I encourage them to do that. And the main thing is just hope. I try to give hope out of it. You just get them to that next stage to get help. So that's in the book. Now, why would I put that in my fiction books? Very simple, because can you imagine if a teacher sat in the classroom and said, I have a book on suicide, or if your parent's an alcoholic, or if you're being abused. There's one there about why don't report my child abuse. I have that one. And who's going to raise the hand? Now, probably at least a half dozen kids in that class desperately need it. But because the Teenage and Young Adult Survival Handbook is an insert in my 4 fiction novels, okay, now the premise could be the young person just wants to read the fiction novel because, they're cool covers, they're exciting, their action. Or in reverse, if you want to give it to someone without putting them on the spot and having a conflict of, why are you giving me that? You could give them, what's this? Well, I know you love these kind of cool stories. Oh, okay. And just And when you give it to them, you just pray and say Hail Mary, that while they're reading, they go, what's this in? And then they find the other book, and the kind of very non-aggressive way getting life-saving information into a young person's hands. As far as the fiction ones, they range from, again, science fiction to action drama. Original stories, I try not to do the same thing that you see a lot. They read like an exciting movie a young person would want to see. I purposely very action-packed. And again, as I said earlier, I put a lot into the characters. A lot. Like, people will say that one's like me, that's like my best friend, that's my girlfriend, that's my boyfriend, that's my brother, that's my sister. They're very relatable characters. It's just like your average teenagers or young adults, except that they were put in fantastic situations. And because I like, when I read a story or see a movie, I really like really great endings, explosive endings. All my books have that. So I kind of like to build up the crescendo in them. And it's humor that young people, it's funny because a lot of adults love the books too. I guess I was told, well, that's a successful young adult book when the adults love them. And they'll say sometimes too, I'm used to young people, adults will say, I relate to that one character so much, Steve, and then they stumble across the handbook themselves and go, wow, so those are kind of about the books there. I'm happy with them. And as I said, a lot of the ideas came from when I was a child.
How did you remember all those ideas from when you were a child? Because obviously you said a lot of them came and you've already written 4 books, and I'm sure there's going to be more books coming out. Did you write them down in a journal, or did you just remember?
Some were by memory, and some I had just different drafts over the years, and I would just keep drafting and writing them. And it's too bad because the original drafts are gone. I wish I still had them. It would have my handwriting. But I also moved a lot, so that happens sometimes when you move. But it's funny you said that. But I mean, some of the stories, like I said, some of the ideas, again, without giving away the exact stories, like one particular story, that idea was way back to my elementary school years, and of course, as you get older, you just obviously you fine tune it, and add the things around it, like whatever's going to happen, the drama parts, the humor.
So, what came first, the books or you speaking to schools?
Me speaking in schools. It's funny because I know most writers write a book and then they try to speak in school. I'm the reverse. I was speaking since I was a teenager, because back then I was the teenager that's, hey, can you speak to other classes? Like you, and then I just never stopped. I just, and then became a quote expert on it as years went on. So I actually was speaking before I was writing, but before I had my first book in print, I was already in schools.
How did you approach the schools? Did they approach you to come
in? It's funny. Some I approached if you needed, but lots of them just would call me. I guess different teachers or different principals or deans, if it's a college, would just contact each other. Hey, listen, I heard about you. Would you come to our school? And I'm always going to say yes, So it just kind of got around, just eventually.
I just love that because I think people can learn a lot from your story because I think you've gone through pretty much all the gambit of what you could have gone through in your childhood and still be able to, like you said, be a jokester and laugh about it, and not laugh about the situation, but find humor and find joy in things.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, because when I and you can imagine with school, I obviously put humor into it, to keep their attention. But yeah, those that relate get it because they're kind of nodding their heads and laughing too. And not that like obviously you're living through it, you need to get help. And like you said, I'm not making light of my abuse, but when you make a joke that someone else will get if they went through it, it kind of causes a camaraderie between you. And again, reminds them they're definitely not alone.
So what is the most amazing thing that's happened with you going to speak at schools?
I think 2 things. Sometimes afterward, a student will walk up and tell me that you really helped me out. But I've had over the years running into individuals like way afterward, whether I meet them in a store, in church or something, said, you spoke at my school. Oh yeah, I need to tell you, I was thinking of suicide then, and you're one of the reasons I went to get help. Or my friend was living with abuse and they went to the school social worker, just like you said. That to me is the most amazing, gratifying, because it's not like, if you run a group, you see them on a regular basis. You speak at a school, you're done. You're not going to see those individuals again. So they'll be approached by that. I mean, talk about making your day. Those times make my life.
I could just imagine, because here you are going about your daily day, not thinking, hoping that the message that you're giving out to these schools is going to make an impact. But then actually somebody verifies and says, hey, you made an impact on my life.
Yeah, absolutely. But one person even told me, she got my quote a little wrong. That's okay. She said, "I remember you said this, and I have kids now, and I do just what you said, you know." And I kind of laughed and said, "Cool," you know. So I just, like I said, that's, and again, unless not everyone's going to look up to you, because those are never going to approach you, but nevertheless, you help, you know.
You never know what kind of seed you planted in their mind.
Absolutely. Which might even grow, maybe not immediately, but maybe as time goes on.
So how did you overcome, besides the self-help groups and everything else and going in therapy and foster care, how did you get a relationship with your mom? Because obviously you must have had some bitterness toward your mom.
Yeah, it did, because but that went away because when she got the place on her own, I moved in, you know what I'm saying? That was a sacrifice for her. And I mean, she's passed away since, but my mom had a good sense of humor and didn't hold that against her, because she made the right move. You know, she made the right move. And we got close over the years, loved to play cards, you know. I usually win in cards. With her, we'd be a dead draw, you know. And I have to say, my mom did not like losing. Somehow the cards would get tossed out my way. And I said, "Did you throw those at me?" She says, "No, I just put them down," you know. But we joke around a lot about her. She loved chocolate. I would get her chocolate, make her happy, you know. And it was nice to get that relationship. And, you know, it's also proof that, you know, a young person may not be getting along with either parent. Mm-hmm. But when the abusing parent's out of the picture, okay, now suddenly the parent, they change also. You know, they're not constantly frantic and venting on you what they're dealing with their spouse. Yeah. Okay, so you get to see another side to that parent. Like, wow, you really have a cool sense of humor, you know, which I didn't really know, you know, and it was, so it ended up being, I'm glad it was a wonderful relationship. By the way, once again, anyone watching this, there's an infamous line that's used, and I wouldn't say it. Some parents, when the kids they never leave the abuser, and the kids abuse, so they leave the house. And they'll say, you know, you never left them. And they'll say, "Well, I stay with them for you." Worst thing you can say, I'm telling you right now, your children. Because they know you didn't stay for me. You stay because you're codependent. You stay because you don't want to leave them, you know. And that gets not just children, it gets even adult children extremely upset. You know. So again, anyone watching this, you know, I always say too, you know, again, an aunt, a cousin, a grandparent, if you even think there's abuse in the house, there is. And maybe invite the kids to sleep over. You know, try to get them away from the abuse, get to know them, talk to them, you know. Sometimes the family covers for the abuser, you know, and that's not right either. And I've seen that. And, you know, the children should come first. But if you don't want to report them and stuff, okay, can you spend more time with this young person, you know, and do that, get them out of the environment.
I love that idea. Now, our time is almost up, but I do want to hit on starting your own publishing company. How did you go about doing that?
Trial and error. But I met the editor, became a dear friend of mine, and of course, obviously, different publishing companies and so on. Because when I first did it, it's much easier to self-publish right now. You know, there's great companies out there that really, and it's cheaper now too. When I first did it, it wasn't as easy. There wasn't digital printing. I really had to learn about artists and, you know, and so on. But I made it fun. You know, and any friends that come to me, I'm always one to explain how I do it, you know, to help them out. But it's a great feeling, you know. And, you know, eventually if another publishing company wants to take over a book, I'll talk to them. But, you know, I've been on, as you said, many shows of the books at this point. And I think self-publishing gives that author a chance to get his stuff out there, her stuff out there, you know. And in my case, it's just great just to open that box when you have a new printing your books. And wow, you know, and I can't draw. I know what designs I want for my covers, but I would tell the artist what I want. And I love artists because I can write, but I can't draw. And to put together what I said, and wow, that just amazes me. And it's just a fun process. So, and they made it, and it's again a lot easier today to self-publish. So if you can't get someone to publish your stuff, don't give up. Publish it yourself. It's not that hard anymore.
So, like I said, our time is almost up. Do you have, before we talk about where everybody can find you at, do you have one little last nugget of wisdom that you would like to share?
Yes, and I said it before, I'm going to repeat it. No matter how bad your situation is, and even if some people told you, "Oh, I don't think this is going to work out for you," don't ever quit. Don't ever stop trying. You might have to try different ways, Okay, whether it's a life thing, don't ever take you. I'm telling you right now, seek the help. Okay, but even if it's a thing like maybe it's not suicide, maybe you talk about giving up writing or giving up acting, or giving up you wanted to be a certain position. They thought it's too much school for you. Don't listen to that. Okay, don't listen. There's too much competition. Always keep trying. You mean people over the years told me, "Oh, writing, no one wants to publish your stuff." I wouldn't have thought of myself. Probably have no books. I won't be on your show right now.
Yep.
So thank God I didn't listen to them. So always stay with positive people who are encouraging you. Okay. Again, you might have to try things differently. It's okay to try different ways, but always keep trying and always keep praying. Sometimes it seems that God's not there for you. He is. Sometimes that we think we know what's best for us and it's not the best for us. He'll get us to the right place. Maybe not the way we thought, but we will be happy. So just hope. And if you have a friend that's going through a lot, you just don't have an answer to the problem. You don't have to have an answer. Spend time with them. Get them out of their house or go to their house and sit with them and just give them hope.
I love that. So now let's talk about where people can find you at.
Okay. Well, there's the website, of course, which is Power Publishing Corp. That's CORP, powerpublishingcorp.com. And you can, not just for the books, you can see different interviews I've had. I always post them and things, articles I wrote. As far as on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, at author Steve Simpson. Again, it's whether it's Instagram or Facebook, at author Steve Simpson.
And you also have a Twitter as well, correct?
Yes, and they all read the same. I try to keep the handle the same. And again, the easiest is the website, powerpublishingcorp.com, because all sorts of stuff is there, and it can lead to the other things. That's kind of the easiest to remember for people.
Steve, I want to thank you for coming on and for being a delight to interview, because I could tell that you've gone through so much, and I could totally tell before you even said that you used humor to deflect that you were one of these people that were always a jokester, because it comes off in the interview.
Thank you. It's survival, and it's okay to laugh. It's important.
Yeah. So guys, once again, Steve, I want to thank you for coming on and for sharing your story. It's so powerful, the suicide and being in a dysfunctional family, being an abused child, and how you've overcome that to help other children to say, hey, you might need to get help. That's an inspiration.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere where you can find Steve, as well as where you can find his books. And if you want to reach out to him, I'm sure on your website, there's a place for people to reach out to you as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So you never know. Something here may have made a difference for somebody else as well. So we will see you on the next chat for the Blog Cabin. Bye.